Hi, everyone. I'm Angie Davis, president of Fight Colorectal Cancer. Very excited to be a part of this, and thank you to OncoDaily for the invitation to share what we're doing here in the US as it relates to advocacy and research. Um, if you are not familiar with Fight Colorectal Cancer, our mission is to fight. We fight to cure colorectal cancer and serve as relentless champions of hope for all affected by this disease through informed patient support, information, impactful policy change, and breakthrough research endeavors. We were founded in 2005. We're going on 2 decades of advocacy, and we're really excited to continue the work towards a cure. For this presentation, I was going to share a little bit of background on our educational resources, our policy advocacy efforts, and then our research advocacy efforts. As it relates to education, we've provide free resources to patients around the country. We partnered with Komodo Health and others to really look at what are the patterns in the US. So where are there opportunities for us to target educational resources? How can we translate these resources? How can we make sure that communities, no matter what zip code, can receive the latest information about colorectal cancer? And that's one of the things that we've seen is even if a clinic or a community has high incidence rates of colorectal cancer, sometimes it is very difficult to receive resources on biomarker testing, clinical trials, access to the latest treatments, or even to know what to ask your physician. So this is a look at what we provide our patient community. We do have a clinical trial finder. I loved the prior presentation on the value of clinical trials and the importance of providing early access to the information patients need to know about how to engage in the clinical trial process and how to talk to their physicians about it. Our clinical trial finder is really for late stage colorectal cancer patients. We were able to develop a unique trial finder where we download all the clinical trials associated with colorectal cancer and we filter them. So if you have your highest opportunity, what are the top 10 to 12 clinical trials to talk to your physician about? I think one of the things that we hear from our patients is an overwhelming process to receive hundreds of clinical trials. So we try to distill it down to the top list of clinical trials from nci.gov. We also have patient curators. So on the back end of our clinical trial, we have comments. So in the US, it takes 6 weeks, up to 6 weeks sometimes for NCI.gov or NCI's clinical trial finder to upload the opening and closing of clinical trials. So in our clinical trial finder, we have notes from our curators on has it reopened, is it closed, is there a publication they can read? So we try to make it as user-friendly as possible for patients. But again, it is for late-stage colorectal cancer patients, but they can search looking at their biomarker, their location, the sort of treatments they've been on, and really kind of help synthesize the information that comes from clinicaltrials.gov. We have an online community. It's a closed community where patients can find opportunities to connect and ask questions. We talk about biomarkers, clinical trials, grief. We really try to create a place for our community to connect using our Community of Champions app. As it relates to advocacy, this is where I think we get really excited at Fight Colorectal Cancer because we do have the two-prong approach. We have policy change and we have research advocacy. I'm going to go over both of those and how we define that. So for policy change, we have a signature event called our Call on Congress. We invite survivors and family members from all over the country to represent their communities to our members of Congress here. And I think that's unique in the United States, where we can set up and schedule meetings where we have 200 to 300 survivors on the Hill, and we meet with them to talk about our priorities, to remind them of colorectal cancer being the second leading cause of cancer deaths, and how important it is for, one, for us to fund research, two, for us to ensure that there is easy access to colorectal cancer screening, and that they have access to treatment options. So we really focus every year on making sure that the colorectal cancer community is heard by our members of Congress and our policymakers from the FDA, NCI, CMS, as well as our individual districts. So I think that is a unique aspect of what the US does, but it's also a vital one because there are so many issues. And I love seeing a global community come together because colorectal cancer is very important, not only domestically, but internationally. United in Blue, we built right after COVID. So it was really our answer to how do we continue to engage the advocacy community even with a global pandemic taking place. So we created an outdoor installation. JAMA had published a stat that was very compelling and drove a sense of urgency for us in the US. And it was by 2030, for patients under the age of 49, men and women, by 2030, colorectal cancer would be the #1 cancer killer for men and women. So we looked at that and we said, well, how many people are impacted by that? And what can we do? And we saw that 28,000 lives are going to be impacted by 2030. And so what we did was we planted 28,000 flags in front of the White House to remind all our members of Congress walking to their offices that there are 28,000 lives at stake. And so we did this in March, and we've continued to do this to remind folks and our policymakers of how important this is. And it really draws this idea that we have to invest in research for us to pave a way to a cure. So we really have been driving home the fact that these are lives that we can save. What I'm really excited about is just a couple weeks ago, we launched our colorectal cancer care report. This sort of aligns with our advocacy efforts on the Hill, but our colorectal cancer care report is really an answer to what does good quality of care need to look like in the US if we look at real world data. So I hope you'll go to our website and download this report. It's a lengthy report, but the way we wrote it was to be very practical. So anyone should be able to read this report and glean from it practical tips on how can you improve care in any clinic or large hospital system. To give additional background, what we did was we convened our industry partners, our data scientists, our researchers, our healthcare professionals, our professional societies together to really look at the data that is currently available to us. So Epic reviewed 1.4 million claims. Freenome was a major partner for us, looking at a database of 8.1 billion commercial insurance claims, as well as looking at 46 million patients. And we did an analysis of what was happening in the US as it relates to colorectal cancer. Komodo was another major partner for us, looking at 1.28 million adults diagnosed with colorectal cancer. And so these are really big numbers. This is claims data. So obviously there are limitations to claims data, but I do want to underscore everyone who partnered on this report provided their time, analysis, and expertise as volunteers. It was pretty incredible for us to do this. It was a report that took us a year to put together. And what we did was we asked ourselves, based on the data that we have, what is easily measured by any clinic, what is simple and easy, what is aligned with our current guidelines in the US, and what can we get out there as far as measuring quality of care from prevention and screening through treatment. So not really seeing it as a silo. Sometimes here professionally, we see it as prevention as one group, screening as one group, treatment as another group. And this report really blends those together. So across the patient journey, what does that look like? And this is what we came up with. So goal number one was looking at timely screening. In the US, the National Colorectal Cancer Roundtable had already laid out a very clear goal of 80% screening for average risk patients. So anyone over the age of 45 needs to be screened for colorectal cancer. And our goal is to get 80% of those individuals screened. From there, we want to ensure that everyone who gets a non-invasive screening test, that means a non-colonoscopy screening test, gets a colonoscopy within 90 days. And in the US, we saw from claims data that after a non-invasive screening test, if it is positive, we have a very short window of time to get them to colonoscopy. So we're really trying to strive for 90 days. Even though studies have shown that we have up to 200 days before we see a change in staging, what we're saying is that for patients, really putting patients first, how do we get them to change their behavior and to have a sense of urgency to be screened? And so 90 days is the goal for that follow-up or follow-on colonoscopy. From there, we said, how long should it take for someone to be diagnosed with colorectal cancer? Once they are diagnosed, how long should it take for them to receive treatment? And what we saw was once you're diagnosed with colorectal cancer, there was a recent report that was published in JAMA that said we really need to get them in within 6 weeks. So that means chemotherapy, radiation, surgery. We need to get them into some level of treatment within 6 weeks. Once they've been diagnosed, we want to strive for 80% of those patients receiving biomarker testing and 80% of those patients who have been diagnosed receive genetic testing, especially for our stage 3 and stage 4 patients. So the report outlines each of these goals. So goal 1, timely screening, goal 2, accurate diagnosis and timely treatment, and then how can we measure these goals? And so we provide an overview of what is currently seen and then what current systems are doing, and how can you approach measuring these goals within your system. Here's a list of our contributors. We had, I must say, I feel like 100 revisions of this report, but it was worth it because we had leading experts from around the country help us from screening through treatment to really guide these goals and guide not only the practicality of them, but alignment with the science and research. So this leads us to, okay, so what are we doing in early age onset? And we surveyed over 900 early age onset patients within our community, and we found a few really important perspectives. And that was when we asked our early age onset community, did you receive fertility preservation options? Only 27% said they received fertility preservation options. Did you face challenges accessing clinical trials or alternative treatments? 58% of our early age onset patients here in the US that we surveyed said they did face these issues. Did you experience gaslighting in your colorectal cancer diagnosis? This is an ongoing issue that we experience, or we are hearing from our patient advocates that 72% of patients did experience gaslighting, and many took years to get diagnosed. And so FightCRC has been hosting an early age conference, a think tank, bringing thought leaders together since 2018 actually. And we've started to really think about how can we pull all our leadership in the US, but then now that we have convened the US leadership, how can we expand this discussion to an international platform, which I love this discussion. I've loved all the presentations today because it lends to the idea that the early age onset issue is a global issue and that we're all experiencing it and all learning at the same time. So as we tackle this and combat it together. So we are hosting a global early age onset convening in June in Barcelona with our partners. And as it relates to research, what I love around our think tanks is that we bring research advocates to the table. So for us, research should have a patient at the table. And so we train our research advocates on the research and we engage them in writing the manuscript. And so recently we published in Frontiers of Oncology on our most recent think tank here in the US, leading up to our global think tank in Barcelona. So I hope if you take a second to look at our publications, you'll see that a patient advocate is on almost every publication that FightCRC does, and that's part of our mission, is to make sure that patients are at the table where research decisions are being made. So we're very excited about the continued discussion around early age onset with our partners. I think it's a shared forum, and having groups come together and start developing shared language, looking at the data, looking at what the trends are. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to continue to learn together, collaborate, and then advance the fight. So I want to thank Oncology Daily and our partners and my fellow presenters for doing all that they're doing in the fight against colorectal cancer.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to OncoDaily on YouTube. Hit the bell icon to stay updated.